This is our 20th year of ministry here at Crossroad Community Church, and it's been an incredible 20 years. From our beginnings at the Napa store, and how that 200-seat building turned into 4 services, and all that we got to see in our beginnings there. And then coming out to this property here at Cokesbury, and how we built the church and the buildings and these ball fields right here. There's been very few people that have seen all 20 years of that ministry, but there's one special person that I think about, and that's my dad, Harold Betts. He served in so many ways. He has a wonderful story, and we wanted to show that story to you today, to give you how he grew up and his testimony of how he came to the Lord, because truly, my father, Harold Betts, is somebody on the crossroad. My dad grew up in the little town of Milton. At the time, about 800 people within town limits, maybe about 1,200 within the mailing district. It was a quaint little town, something like a Mayberry, and a lot of good memories for my dad.
I was born in Milton, October 14th, 1930, at home. And there was a doctor there, that's all they tell me. Of course, I don't remember that, but anyhow, again, it was said in October. And then in December, we moved across the street to my home my father had just built. And of course, I lived there for the rest of my life that I lived at home before I got married and moved away. Where we lived, of course, was on the opposite side of town from where the school was. So when I got to school age, and at that time, buses didn't pick you up in school. So, but I was convenient that my grandfather, who was a farmer, was distributing milk through the town at that time. So I would get in the bus, or not bus, but the pickup with him and ride through to school on the other side of town. And that was the thing I think is kind of unique. I think about it that I said I didn't ride a school bus when I was about 12 or 14 years old, something like that. We had a snowstorm in town. Couldn't ride my bicycle, so I was walking through, and the bus driver came by and saw me and stopped and picked me up. So I got to ride the school bus one day when I was going in school. So my parents, of course, from the time that I was there, was my father had started a very unusual business, I guess, in the beginning, that he was carrying chickens and eggs to Philadelphia. That's what he was doing. So that grew, I guess I should say. And a little bit later, he decided to go into start a business in town, which was actually a used furniture business. And we were taking chickens, more chickens now, up to what they call a live market up in Philadelphia, which was going up there to a commission house. They would sell the chickens and give money back to my dad and so forth. And of course, what happened there, the local grocery stores would come in and get some chickens and take them and slaughter them and sell them to the individual areas where they lived.
Because Milton was a small town, most of the kids played almost all the sports, including my father. And he had a special love for baseball and soccer.
Of course, we had a small school, and for the boys, we had 3 teams, which were basketball, baseball, and soccer. Did not have a football team. Didn't have a football team until after I left there. Then they had one later than that. But I participated in all 3 of them. Then when I went on to college at the University of Delaware, and I got up there and trying to think what kind of sports am I going to try to go to and so forth. And I figured when I thought about soccer, I thought No, I don't think. Probably be too many guys there for me to seem challenge that and so forth. So I didn't try out for that, but I got on a cross-country team. Running, of course, which we ran 2 or 3 miles and so forth like that. Participated in my freshman year. And I never won any races, but I always finished them all, so forth when I got there. I tried out for not basketball, didn't try for that. It built me too close to the ground for that. So anyhow, but I did try for baseball. I didn't make it for that. Now when I got to my sophomore year, I decided to make a change. Yes, I had been in cross country, but there just wasn't enough activity in that for me. So I went out to try out for the soccer team. Now, when I got out there for the tryout on that team, I was kind of the odd guy out because they did have at that time a freshman soccer team. Of course, I wasn't on it. So we came out in the beginning of the practice for the sophomore year. I was kind of a stranger on court, so to speak, because there were some players that had been on a freshman team and the other team players from years before. But I did make it on the squad by doing pretty good. When the season started, I was not playing much, but I kind of worked it in and so forth. By the end of the season, I was playing full time, and it turned out I had played half the time of the season on the field. So that earned me a school letter for that year. And then we moved on to the next year in soccer, and that year I was the only player that played every minute of every game. I was the high scorer on the team, and I was honorable mention All-American on the soccer.
Dad has enjoyed farming all of his life, but his love for it started early on his grandfather's farm, who we called Pop Dickerson.
I talked about my grandfather with the milk route and so forth in, and I would go out there occasionally, and we went out there almost every Sunday. We'd go out there for dinner and so forth, but I'd stay sometimes overnight, and they were really a bona fide country home. Had no bathroom, had the outhouse, of course, out there, and so forth. So it was indeed that. But seeing the farming operation with the cows and the farming and so forth, that interested me. So that was what drew me on to working in that at a later time period. And I think that because of my interest in that and so forth, my dad later bought some land.
So much of what my dad did was supported by my mother. And Dad has his own stories of how they met and how that relationship began.
Of course, we went to church when I was weekly, going to church on Sunday. And as we had it then in most churches, we had the Sunday school first, and then after that we would go into other services. Well, I was in Sunday school, and of course I came out, I would go and sing in the choir for the service. And this particular Sunday, I was in the choir and waiting there, and my mother walked in. My mother taught the adult women's Sunday school class. And she came in and she had these 2 people that she wanted to tell us about in the class, because she had invited them to come out and sing in the choir if they wanted to. Because obviously then we didn't have a lot of practicing on the choir, just come in and sing. But it just so happened that those 2 women were my future wife and her mother. So nothing really happened drastically right at that time, but then a little time later, it developed that we became rather friendly. Well, of course, after this time, we became pretty good friends. Jack and I got married in 1953, and she began to learn a bit more, I guess, about farming and so forth. And just to tell you about how things were then, I bought 13 acres, had a house on it. Now, not a great big modern house, so forth, but it was for $5,000 when I bought it. So we think about now the prices of today compared to that, we know that's quite a bit different.
When Dad started getting into business with his father, Clyde Betts, It was amazing the variety of things they did, from everything on the farm involving animals and equipment to a hardware store to Pop-Pop's experience with the furniture stores and all that. It was just amazing how they touched the community of Milton.
The store business, it was doing very well, but then he connected with kind of the farming part of it. He started a warehouse that would, for farm supplies, so to speak. It was sort of like we might say that Southern States is, so it had feed and so forth for all kinds of animals and so forth. And then a little bit later, he added on the hardware part of it. Had that for a few years, and then the opportunity came up that there was an Oliver farm business that was up for sale because the owner had passed away. So Dad purchased that. Now he couldn't move it there because he didn't have a facility for it, because at that time it was in Harbison. But after about a year or so, he built an addition onto the store where it was now to have room for this Oliver business. And we had that, of course, for a few years until later on. But it was, we discontinued that because of some circumstances with what things we're getting into with the technology and the technicians of electronics and hydraulics, and we just didn't want to expand into that, so that was discontinued. When we had gotten into the farming business in the beginning, I had just a little bit of experience with animals. I remember one day particularly, I was dragging or operating a pair of mules, and they were pulling a drag over a field that were getting prepared for planting. And I thought I was great. I walked through that barefoot. Well, after I wasn't doing a tremendous amount of area and so forth, but I know when I got done that night, I had a problem. My feet had swollen up. I couldn't get my shoes on. So that taught me better to do that. And then another area of me operating was where you had a dairy farm also at that time. And we had silage that we cut, and we had to take it up to the silo to put it in the chopper, and it was picked up in the fields and put on wagons. And the wagons were, of course, pulled by mules or horses, which one it is, so I did do some operating of that. But then it came to a time where tractors began to come into it, and so forth, more than they had, and so forth. So we got out of the animal business as far as the farming was concerned, and got into the farming part of it. And I remember back in those days, of course, every acre that was planted was plowed. And we had at that time, I think it was about maybe 3 plows would operate at a time, but they were only 2 bottom plows that we were using to operate. And of course, it progressed over the period of time with bigger machinery and so forth. And today we don't plow anything, basically, with farming and so forth. It's amazing how that has changed so much over the years. But that, of course, intrigued me to see that. When I went to college, I took an agronomy degree, which is learning about farming and so forth. And so I used part of that course in the operations and learning and so forth. But it was indeed a tremendous change when I think about how it was when I first started and what it is now. We got into the laying hen business. We had about 20,000 laying hens for eggs. And for those, we, of course, sold them in the store. But we also had quite a market area down in Lewis, Rehoboth, and over the county really had some eggs stores that we went to and so forth for several years on that. And then it got to the fact where some regulations were coming in and so forth, and it just cut it down so that when we didn't have the market down in Rehoboth area and the Lewis area. At that time, when it became September, most of that shut down. So we didn't have the sales there, so their excess eggs we had to sell at a discount to another distributor up in the Newcastle area, really where it was. We also had hogs on the farm, which we had a breeding herd. We were getting pigs, shall we say all that. We were taking breeder pigs to up at Lancaster, but we also had a finishing floor that we finished some hogs to their slaughter weight and so forth. And we were killing those hogs and selling the meat through our store, where the hardware store would be part of it. We did that for a few years, and then we had a complication that came in. The people that was slaughtering the hogs for us went out of business. And we had the only other place we had to do it, what happened, we had to sell the hogs and then buy meat back. Well, the problem was we weren't getting our meat, what we had grown, back, and our meat was exceptional in quality and the way it looked and so forth. So we had to phase that part of the operation out, and eventually went out of the hog business altogether. We had a time period there that prices were not good.
Dad was always a faithful person when it came to church. He was faithful in attendance, he was faithful in giving, he was faithful in serving. Our family was always there on Sundays, but we still were missing a personal understanding of the relationship as Jesus being Lord of our lives. Thankfully, as some things happened at Goshen Church, my whole family, including my father, had an amazing change.
We, of course, as a family, were going to church, and every Sunday we would go to the Sunday school and then church service and so forth. And over the years, unless we happened to be away or do something, maybe somebody might be sick or something like that, we would miss one once in a while. But it was very, we were good church attenders, shall we say. And of course, there was ministry going too. We had a change in pastors like the Methodist Church does every once in a while, and there was always, you'd have a pastor that you thought quite a bit about, and then you have the next one you wouldn't quite think as much about or whatever else. So we indeed were going through that, and then we got there was a juvenile, I don't know, what did they call it, revival, I guess it would say, and it was affecting a lot of the teenagers. And we had a couple boys with John and Rick that were affected somewhat by that, by the meetings they were going to and so forth. And so forth, so we kind of got our attention a little bit. And then the Methodist Church came through with a layman's witness ministry that was going on. And in this ministry, there would be some laymen, husband and wives, coming from areas to your church, and you'd have a leader, and that was not a pastor, it was just a layman that was doing it. So we got that to come into our church at the Methodist Church we had, and it really shook us up, shall we say. Revealed things that we were not aware of, had not witnessed before, when we saw the movement and the affection and the direction of the Holy Spirit ministering to that. And that we knew there was going to be some change. There was changes in us and what we thought about and how we looked and directed and what we tried to do and so forth like that. So it was we know that in that there was a few things that happened, of course. You talked about the kids, why there was a Salvation Gospel Singers group established with Rick and John and Bruce and Bill Jr. And they were traveling to some of the churches locally. A lot of the local churches would always have a revival service during the fall time and so forth. And so we were spending a lot of time there with that and getting ministered to. And it was showed our desire, I guess our direction was indeed changing for the time over the time period. And after this thing, and we had left the church, there was, with the seeds that were planted into the people that were there, we kept talking about to the ministry that we needed to have a revival at our church. So that's what they did, and they called in an evangelist by the name of Earl Tyson. And that indeed turned out to be a tremendous blessing to not only to the community, but to the rest of us that were there.
There came a time in my dad and mother's life where they had to make a decision because they were growing spiritually and they weren't being fed enough where they were. This was the beginnings of a move toward what was going to become Eagle's Nest, and in the future, Crossroad.
Well, as we talked about, of course, these things that we didn't feel like there was something still missing in our church and so forth, that we had a pastor sometimes whose sermon didn't have anything to do with the Bible, and so forth, so we still were concerned with that, and began to have Bill Samuels began to have a Bible study that was his home, and Rick was participating in that sometimes, and we got meeting there, and it was decided that we were going to have a church, establish a church. And of course, they were concerned about where we were going to meet, and we were, of course, had have some meetings at Bill's house in the basement, and so forth. But it as so happened, as I said, where we used to have the hardware store was now vacant, so it was indeed available for us. So that's where we became a church, Eagle's Nest, established there.
My dad and mom's service here at Crossroad is almost legendary. Dad's here for virtually every service, and people still have wonderful memories of my mom hugging them as they came to church.
Well, at Crossroad, I was going with ushering. I was helping count the money at the end of the service. I was trying to do whatever I could in ways to minister, to pray for some people occasionally and so forth. And so it was just a time of ministering and witnessing the growth that was taking place, the people that were showing up, and when they come by and they see all the cars parked out in front, they wonder what's going on there, and some of them stop to see, so forth. So indeed, we had that happen many, many times, where it was a time of recognition and worshiping in many, many ways. Of necessity with growth and so forth, we shift to where Crossroad Church is now. And several of you have heard about the Rick sharing with, that's where God had told him about several years before. So it was indeed an accomplishment of that. So after building a church and get it all done, we moved in. It was a tremendous happening. We got there, and the services began, and had to multiply the services because of increasing attendance. Still had a Saturday night service, and got up to 3 services at one time on Sunday. Because of the pandemic, I've cut back, and we're building numbers back up now. Preferably we'll get back up. But indeed, it was a lack of, when we were there at the services, my wife Jackie was the greeter. Some people felt if they didn't get her hug when they came in, they didn't get the full service. So indeed, she was indeed a blessing to many, many people, and someone mentions to me once in a while about that, and I really appreciate that. I'm blessed by being connected with her over the years, and the blessings that were there, and that are still happening, and there's continually amazes me when I hear about things that are happening, like the Vacation Bible School they just went through, and a number of people that volunteered there. With over 140 people, and with over 250 children that were there. And that indeed is a tremendous blessing for me to be able to witness that and to participate in that to a degree and also with the services that do happen on a weekly basis, that the movement that they see and the touching of individuals and the blessings that are had and the notes I get once in a while from someone who thanks me for doing what I do, with trying to greet as many people as I can or shake their hand. At 92 years old, I'm indeed blessed that I can still minister in many ways with greeting people or shaking hands or hugging people or helping to count the money and praying for people at the front sometimes in that, and helping cut grass around I think about when the number of years that I've helped do that and so forth. So I'm still blessed that am able to be able to continue to do that. And I would like to encourage anyone that may be watching this that has a problem or something in one way, shape, or form, whatever it may be, God is there to answer. If you'll just ask Him for guidance and direction, to come to someone for prayer, or to pray yourselves, whichever, Lord, it is. But He is there. He is willing, and He is able to minister to us in many, many fascinating ways.
Thank you, Dad, for inspiring me all these years by your service, by your dedication, your faithfulness to Christ, your hard work. You've made me a better pastor, and you've been a blessing to people here. The day you decided to take up your cross and follow Him, you have been making a difference, and we are all so grateful that you are somebody on the crossroad.
Well, I guess that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.